Hello there, family. My friend, Dr. Nicole Fields, and myself have prepared. I'm Dr. Lucretia Dye, and we have prepared a brief webinar for you about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging best practices. So, the way that I want to approach this presentation, family, is I'll start with the what, the how, the why, and then the how. Okay. And hopefully, as you observe the presentation, you can connect to what I'm saying and apply it to yourself. Because I believe that diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging really starts with the individual, and how you feel about things, how you see things determines how you participate in them, correct? So, diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging best practices. Here we go. I want to start with a little bit of just the brain and how our brain is our bodyguard, family. So, what do I mean by that? The brain being our bodyguard is so wonderful because it always wants to keep us safe. That means that the brain is always scanning things, especially things that look different. It's always scanning, looking for things that may be different or unfamiliar. So as we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, this comes up, right? Anything that seems different for the brain sometimes can be a little alarm. It can be like, what is this? So because our brain is our bodyguard, it wants to keep us safe. So the way that we see things, we see with our brains and not with our eyes. So our experiences strongly determine how we show up and how we see things. The brain also functions on an efficiency model. So what does that mean? The things that are most important, the brain will keep in front of it. And sometimes it'll focus on things that are unfamiliar because it feels like I need to keep my person safe. So it's going to focus on those things and really make a big deal about them sometimes. You'll understand where I'm going with this as we go through slides, okay? Here's a fun slide. Everybody just check it out. I think it's a wonderful cartoon, but it's definitely in line with what I'm saying. Like you see the brain over there checking out, can't do anything else because it really needs to focus on if there's something bad around. And our hearts are so much like just looking for the good, right? So what a wonderful combination with our brain and our hearts and just our whole bodies, right, family? Just a fun cartoon I wanted to show you. All right, so more into the brain, and this will help you understand like how you show up as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. This will help you understand like why we all can't help it, but we all have prejudices, and a lot of us function heavily with stereotypes walking around our brain all the time. So let's talk about the unconscious mind. And this beautiful brain that you have processes 11 million bytes of information in a second, but only 2% of our emotional cognition is available to us consciously. There's a whole lot of us as far as emotional cognition. There's a whole lot of parts of us that are not consciously available to us, but they're there. And messages that we get on a daily can be framed to speak to our unconscious. So we know even in marketing or different things like that, or even in our society, messages speak to us. So whether it's the images that you see, the people who we see in the office, everything speaks to us. And the process of othering occurs in our unconscious network. So othering is any time that you see someone else separate from you. So here's how I like to share that. Othering is any time I see someone separate from me and not realizing how connected we truly are. The moment I see somebody else as separate and not connected in this whole world, on this planet with Mother Earth, then othering can easily occur within me. So this can lead to racial, ethnic, religious, class biases the moment you start othering another. We'll get into that a little further. So the brain relies on pattern recognition as a basic principle, right? So if you are around a particular type of group of people or people that practice a certain thing, it becomes so familiar and it becomes recognizable to you, and the brain feels comfortable because it relies on pattern recognition, and it loves to have patterns and recognition of things. And it works to predict the near future and automate as much as possible. So the brain is always working for you. So that means if you are around a certain group of people and those people are similar to you, or they like things that you like, or basically live the way that you live, the brain appreciates that. And what can happen is that becomes the only world that you know. And so when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's tricky because when we just keep ourselves around a certain group of people that think a certain way, when we get around others who may think a different way or just are completely different from us, our brain naturally kind of wants to reject it. And we have to be conscious of that. So let's talk a little bit more about the subconscious mind. So the subconscious mind uses three processes to make sense of the millions of information that we perceive. So our minds naturally sort things into categories. Aha, family, this is perfect. So right now, you don't have to feel bad when you say something like, oh, the girl or the boy or the young person or the older person or the person, the Black person or the Latina person. Your brain naturally categorizes, right? So that's automatic. Your brain will naturally sort people. And it's not a healthy thing to say, oh, I don't see color, because that means you're not seeing the aspect of an individual, right? So creating associations between things, the brain naturally does that as well. So for example, when I was growing up, I remember being in a grocery store and I was standing in line and my mom was allowing me to check out by myself. I felt like it was dynamic and I was amazing because I can go to the counter by myself with money. And I remember a man, he was a tall man, and I remember his cologne and I remember his skin complexion and all these aspects of him. And he touched my head and kind of rubbed down the back of it. And I remember how my body remembered how uncomfortable that felt. So naturally, because my body had this experience, and my brain had this experience, future experiences where I might see a man with the same stature, with the same type of cologne and the same skin complexion, my brain will naturally create an association that this man that I don't know, similar to this other man, may have an association, and my body may respond in that same way. I hope that's clear for everyone. Filling in the gaps when we only receive partial information. The thing about that is the brain will get information about a person or people group, and it's based on your past experiences. It's also based on the way you tell the story about a person is based on your heart. So here's the most important thing about DEI and belonging. What's your heart like? Are you a person that feels like you're better than other people, or there are some people who just aren't good enough, or some people who are just below you? Or do you see every single person as sacred, just as sacred as you are? It shows up in the way that you live and the way you interact with each other, and especially in the way you serve others, in the way you service people, right? So we have schemas. So these three processes together that I just talked about, they add up to frames, the frames through which our brains help us understand and navigate the world. Here, y'all going to understand this. Our brain automatically sorts people into categories. I shared that with you all. We fill in information about others even when we don't know them. The info is often based on stereotypes. So a stereotype can easily be created by something I see on TV. For example, if all I see on TV, when I see a judge sitting up in a courtroom, is that it's a white male with a white beard and, with glasses on, that's a stereotype that I believe that all judges are white males with white beards and glasses, because my brain is filling in the blanks and interpreting that. Association. So we have positive association with stereotypes, and then we have negative associations. So we have preferences and then prejudices. This can happen in every aspect of life when it comes to diversity. How do associations happen? So reading social repetition. In society, when we look around and when we see things a certain way, we start to believe, the brain starts to believe that that's the way that it is. So for example, I don't know about you all. I personally identify as heterosexual female. So because in the society I currently live in, society really celebrates heterosexuals, right? So because that is celebrated and supported and conspired towards, we see couples, or even in media or things that we see, there's a repetition of heterosexual relationships. So that tells us that heterosexual is the norm, or the brain likes it because it's familiar. When in actuality, we get to open ourselves up to different relationships, right? Also observing the social structure of groups, what patterns are repeated. When we talk about stereotypes and negative stereotypes, the moment you hear a negative stereotype about a certain people group or a certain group and how they live or how they do things, especially if it's negative, then usually because we'll constantly hear that, or if we constantly hear that, we believe that. The brain will believe that. An example that I have is association of brown and black people with negative images. We see that in the media all the time. We need to create new associations. So educators, here's an important thing. If you walk into your building or walk into your office and you look around and you look at all the pictures that are hanging up or all the information that's hanging up, how many of those people come from a different group is in regards to maybe sexual identity, maybe in regards to race, or maybe in regards to religion? We want to have images of all people up, right? We want it to be so familiar with everyone. Cultural bias is interpreting and judging occurrences in terms particular. So when I just see the world from my own lens, it's kind of like if you think about, I was just talking to my daughter about this the other day. I'm reading this amazing book about animals and their world. So we as humans expect dogs to function the way we do. So we know that dogs, absolutely, their lens and what they fill the world with is through their nose. But with us, we think it's rude for a dog to go smelling some spaces, right? And we make them stop. But that is us interpreting and judging from our perspective as humans, when dogs absolutely need to be with those noses and exploring everything. That's what makes them so magnificent. Just paralleling that, and hopefully you all understand with that example, sometimes we do that as a people group. So I basically just see other people from my lens, and I don't open myself up to try to understand things from their world. And I talked about prejudice, also coming to a judgment on a subject before learning where the preponderance of evidence actually lies. And this leads to isms, all the isms you can think of: sexism, racism, ableism. We can go down the list, right, family? The unconscious bias is the result of the pervasive stereotypical images. You can take responsibility for what images are in the spaces when you're working with clients, when you're working with students, when you're working with children. Change the images. Make sure, and what I have my students do a lot of times, I say, everybody pick up your phone. And if you look through your pictures and every single person on your phone, or a majority of the people on your phone, look like you come from the same socioeconomic background as you and pretty much think like you have work to do. So you need to change those images, because the brain definitely remembers images. And it says a lot about just what your world is like, right? Most important, family, you are not responsible for your first thought, but you are responsible for your second thought and your first action. Most of us, when it comes to DEI and belonging, we were taught a certain thing. Or because of the images around us during our childhood and growing up into our adult world, we were taught to think or feel a certain way about different people groups. And we just have to be honest about that. The one thing that we know is that we are not responsible for our first thought, but we are responsible for our second and our first action. So we have it within us to change that. Any of those thinkings or those isms or some of those teachings that we were taught that we know they just ain't right, y'all? They ain't right. I also want to talk about connection and how critical it is when we talk about belonging, the connection. I say to my students often, I don't know how you can sit with another until you've sat with yourself. So in practice, best practice is sit with yourself first, connect to yourself first, because there's an energy that exists between me and other people. And I want that energy to be that they feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel valued. And when we give that, and I do it without judgment, when we give that, there's strength in the relationship, right? When people sense how connected they are to humanity, they feel more curious about others and have more courage to serve. And we serve people based on how we see them, y'all, right? To me, that is the best practice. The best practice is to start with your own heart. For us to be better in DEI, all of this work and with belonging, is to start with ourselves first, to really go inside and kind of excavate some of those things that we know we need to deal with. Also, I just place my hands on my heart because I know how strong everything that comes in regards to my heart, everything that comes out of my heart is like a radio wave that's going to other people. And there's this connection, this vibration that's happening. So I want to always be dealing with my heart, family. The heart, the electromagnetic field is 5,000 times more powerful than the brain. So it's a heart matter with the way we interact with others when we do this DEI work. What are you holding on to and don't? What are you holding on to and not opening yourself up for a new feeling or a new thought about? And most of our great teachers, counselors, and leaders transmit most of their work through their heart vibrations. Think about the co-regulation. Think about those people who really made a difference in your life. I want to give you all a second to think about that. And then, family, let's practice. Like I said, when it comes to images, when it comes to the brain and the unconscious mind, when we look at these groups of these sweet baby boys, because of the images that our society has given us, what's the story that you see? What's their narrative? What do we know to be true? And where do you feel this in your body? And what is it that you feel? Family, thank you for allowing me to share with you. I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite topics. Like I said, I'm Dr. Lucretia Dye, and I'll be happy to hear from you, any feedback, any sharing. I love it. You all take care.